Salve, and welcome to Ask a Legionary. I'm Titus Suetonius Trajanus. Today I'm going to answer some of your questions. There was a particular inquiry about marching camps and how they were built so quickly by the Roman army. I'm going to do my best today to answer this question. We have many of examples from our primary sources, as well as some experimental archaeology that was conducted to answer this question. I know your primary question wasn't about how they were constructed, but in order to tell this, we're going to have to kind of give a brief detail of how they were constructed to kind of answer the question of how it could take so fast. In a typical marching formation of the Roman army during the first century, in hostile territory, the vanguard would arrive first. In this, they had the survey crew. When the survey crew marked out the camp, a ditch was dug around it. Vegatius tells us that ditch was 5 foot wide by 3 foot deep. Josephus also mentions the depth of the trench as well. Then a rampart was built using the turf and the dirt from a ditch. A palisade was erected with sticks that were carried by the legion if they weren't available in the surrounding area. They did not want to build it around mountains, so the enemy could not look down into their camp. They always wanted a fresh water source nearby, but not too close to a river so flooding could take out their camp. These were carefully chosen spots by the engineers in the survey crew. Sources mention a color party from every century in the vanguard, marking out areas. They would mark out the camp. They would start by erecting the tents of the officers, the praetorium, and then the tents of the tribunes. Josephus mentions saws, axes, sickles, chains, ropes, and baskets as tools carried by the surveying and engineering crew that were in the vanguard of the army. Each fort either had a square or rectangle shape, kind of like a playing guard. If they were building a camp in hostile territory and there was an enemy nearby, some of our sources say that half the infantry and half the cavalry was stationed around the other half as they were building the fort. By estimations, it's assumed that a legion of 5,000 men could dig and entrench and build a rampart in about an hour. If that was at half strength building the camp, it would probably take around 2 hours. Some experimental archaeology was conducted during the 1890s by a German Kaiser. It took 100 men about 2 to 3 hours to dig a camp reasonable to the size of 100 men. They wanted to figure out how long it would take a Roman legionary. So that's a brief overview of how the camps were built. I'm going to dig into some of our primary sources now and go over some exact quotes. The historian Polybius tells us that one of the tribunes and those of the centurions go ahead and survey the whole area where the camp is to be placed. They begin by determining the spot where the consul's tent should be pitched, and on which side of this space to quarter the legions. Having decided this, they first measure out the area of the praetorium. Next, they draw the straight line along which the tents of the tribunes are set up, then the line parallel to this, which marks the starting point of the encampment area of the troops. All this is done with little loss of time, and the marking out is an easy task, since all distances are regulated and are familiar. They then proceed to plant flags, marking out the camp. That explains in depth the marking out of the camp and the arrival of the high-ranking officers. The site would have been leveled. If it was hilly, they would have leveled the site before building their camp. So let's look at now a Josephus quote from the Jewish Wars. Josephus, when speaking about the Romans and their efficiency, notes, "Nor can their enemies easily surprise them with the suddenness of their incursions. For as soon as they have marched into an enemy's land, they do not begin to fight till they have walled their camp about." So Josephus clearly states that they walled their camp around when building a camp in the enemy territory. As I mentioned earlier that they should have kept half the troops on guard when building a camp, we know from Josephus' sources that when the legions arrived in front of the city of Jerusalem to begin the siege, that they worked diligently at building their camp but did not leave enough troops to guard as the Jews sallied out and attacked them and almost routed an entire legion while they were building their camp. Now, Vegatius is questioned as a source by many, but in my personal opinion of him, he takes a lot of historical authors, writes their work, and jumbles it all together. He, however, I will say, lived way closer to the time period than we do. His information needs to be taken with a grain of salt, but a lot of it is confirmed by other sources. So we're going to look at a quote from him next. Vegatius says, "The sentries are employed by turns on the work, and are regularly called to the relief by a crier, till the whole of the work is completed. It is then inspected and measured by the centurions, who punish such as have been indolent or negligent." These few quotes that I've thrown at you have explained the efficiency of which the Romans built camp. And in order to know how quickly they set up camp, I'm going to read another quote from Josephus, which describes how quickly they broke camp and how organized they were at doing that. "Now when they go out of their camp, the trumpet gives a sound, at which time nobody lies still. But at the first intimation they take down their tents, and all is made ready for their going out. Then do the trumpets sound again to order them to get ready for the march. Then do they lay their baggage suddenly upon their mules and their other beasts of burden, and stand as at a place of starting, ready to march, when also they set to fire their camp. And this they do because it will be easy for them to erect another camp, and that it may not even be of use to their enemies. Then do the trumpets give a sound the third time, that they are to go out, in order to excite those that are any account are a little tardy, that so none of them may be out of his rank when the army marches. Then does the crier stand at the general's right hand, and ask them thrice in their own language, whether they be ready to go out to war or not. To which they reply as often with a loud and cheerful voice, saying, 'We are ready.'" We have to remember, the Roman army was extremely disciplined. They conquered the known world at their time. It was quoted, too, that a proper soldier should be more afraid of his centurion than afraid of the enemy. So if you were that afraid of your centurion, I guarantee you would work your hardest to build that camp. I hope this answered your question on how quickly a Roman army could build a camp and why they could do it so. If you have any other questions, comments, please feel free to ask them in the comments below. Make sure you give this video a like, comment, subscribe, and share it with others. Thank you. We'll see you in the next video.